On year 11, it's Monday the 23rd of November. I've got a very exciting lesson on roots planned here. So watch the rest of this video, watch a video, write some notes, and then most importantly, do the questions, then mark your own, and only get in touch with me about this lesson if there's specific things that you don't understand, okay? Right, most people learn at home. I know for a fact that most of you guys are really focused now. I'm confident that you will be trying as hard as you will be if you're in school. The only thing I'm slightly concerned about is that we're not doing them interleaved starters, so we're not doing chemistry or physics starters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set some quizzes for you to do on teams or forms, and what I'll be doing is I'll be checking your scores, seeing what you do understand and what you don't understand. The things that you don't understand, that'll kind of make up the starters when you come back to school, okay? Right, yeah, good luck with the lesson. Yeah, get in touch if there's any specific questions that you don't understand, and I'll see you when you get back. Bye. Right, before we understand how the roots work, it's probably good to go over cell transport. So what I would do, if I was you, year 11, I would pause this video now and just try and fill in this table yourself. Can you remember these things from year 9 and 10? I'm going to fill it in a second, but obviously if you do that first, your brain's going to have to think, do I remember this, do I not? Right, so diffusion, the concentration gradient is high to low. So things move from high to low. What moves? So any sort of things that dissolve and move around, gases and liquids can all diffuse. So most things, solids can't because the particles can't move around, but most things can diffuse. Does it need a membrane? No, it doesn't. And an example would be, so like oxygen going into your blood in the lungs, things like sugars reabsorbing into the kidney when there's more of them in the fluid than there is in your blood. We're going to talk about diffusion and active transport in a little bit, so there'll be other examples. Right, active transport is low to high, and because it's against the concentration gradient, then it requires energy. Examples of things where active transport take place, so things we've done in the past is like glucose in the kidney, so that's selective reabsorption. Does it need a membrane? Yeah, it definitely does, and this active transport takes place in these little proteins that are in the membrane, but it does need a membrane for it to take place. Right, osmosis is the movement of water specifically, so it's just water. So what moves water? And it moves from where there's lots of water to where there's not much water. So you can say a high water potential to a low water potential. Does it need a membrane? Yes, it does. A semi-permeable membrane. So that means something that would let water through, but not salts or sugars. So osmosis takes place in our large intestines when we absorb water. You need to know the potato practical. So the potato's cell membrane can absorb water, so the potato gets heavier in a dilute solution and it gets lighter in a concentrated solution because water moves out through osmosis. Right, now we've thought about that, again a little bit more revision. So can you remember how to label a plant cell? So this is a root hair cell specifically. So could you label that? Would you know what these things are? Would you know what the yellow thing is outside of the cell? The kind of the grey browny thing outside of the cell? Would you know what the green stuff is inside this blue cell component there? So again, pause the video and see if you could label that. Right, so all cells have got cell membranes, so animal cells included, and the cell membrane will be the one that's closest to the cytoplasm. The cell wall here goes around the cell membrane and it protects the cell membrane, and that is one of its jobs. So specifically root hair cell structures, we've also got the root hair, which sticks out into the soil, and wider plants have a root hair, so it increases the surface area for water absorption. So if cells didn't have the root hair, water could get into the cell here and here and here, but it just massively increases the area of the plant cell that's touching the soil, so that enables plants to soak up a lot more water and minerals from the soil than they otherwise would be able to. Right, then we'll have inside we've got the cytoplasm here, then this is the vacuole, and these little components there, what are they? Chloroplasts? No, of course they're not, because root hair cells are under the ground in the soil. There's no light, so they wouldn't need chloroplasts, so root hair cells do not have chloroplasts. That's an adaptation that they have. But they do have lots of mitochondria, and we're going to talk about why they've got tons and tons of mitochondria. So I hope you remember that mitochondria, it's their job to do aerobic respiration, which produces energy. So why would a root hair cell need energy? I'll give you a clue. Right, so adaptation. So yeah, root hair cells have got a root hair. Why? To increase the surface area, and they have many mitochondria. Why? Because they need energy to do active transport. Right, before we do the next thing, which is pretty much the only new difficult thing that you need to understand this lesson, it's useful, I think, first to think about what the cell wall looks like, because students often get mixed up thinking that the cell wall controls what enters and leaves. It doesn't. That's a cell membrane. So the cell membrane, if you do A-level biology, it's called the plasma membrane, and it moves. You can basically think about it as, so when you drop fat in water, it doesn't mix with water. The plasma membrane it's made out of lipids, which are fats, and it basically would move around. It kind of like floats, so it surrounds the cytoplasm, which is mainly made of water, and the plasma membrane, it lets some things through, so things like water and oxygen pass through it really, really easily, carbon dioxide, but bigger things and charged ions like salts don't pass through it very well. So anytime a salt has to get past the cell membrane, it has to get through these proteins, which is where active transport takes place. So because it lets some things through and not everything, that really does enable it to control what comes into the cell and what goes out of the cell. So cells are full of sugars and proteins and amino acids and things that the cell needs to grow and do its jobs. The cell wall goes around the cell membrane, and it is made out of this chemical called cellulose, which is just crosses, it's a polymer. It's a really, really long molecule, and the polymers just build up in crisscross sections. So if you've got some paper in front of you, and if you looked at paper under the microscope, this is what it would look like. And the reason why it looks like that is it's because it's made out of cellulose. It's made out of cell walls. So paper comes from trees. Trees have cell walls. The reason why I think it's really, really useful to think about this is because the cell wall has gaps in it. So between these fibres, there's gaps, and that allows some things to move through the cell wall, but not, without going into the cell itself. So if you've got two plant cells, we would have this here, then another cell membrane above it. You've got this big space in between the two cells, which allows things to just flow before they go into the cell. So the cell wall doesn't control what enters and leaves, and it has gaps in which water can actually kind of soak into without actually passing the cell membrane to go into the cell. Right, the reason why we've done that is because you need to understand these two diagrams here. So this would be the tip of a root under the in the soil, and things that absorb through the roots are water, and then things like ions, some minerals. So ions are, you would call these minerals, and it's things like nitrates. Why do plants need nitrates? So nitrates enable plants to make proteins, so they're one of the important things in amino acids. So for plants to get bigger, they need to absorb nitrates from the soil so they can make proteins with that, so they can build new cells. Right, we're going to think about this in a little bit of a different way. So the roots, it's their job to pass water up to the leaf, because remember, water is one of the reactants in photosynthesis. So plants need tons of water. So they need to get as much water into them cells as possible so they can pass it up these xylem vessels. And we're gonna learn more about the xylem when we do a lesson on transpiration, it's called. So the movement of water is called transpiration. So we need as much water to get into the plant as possible. So how does water get into plants? What type of cell transport is it? Well, it's osmosis. And what can happen is, so if this is your root hair cell, and these are cells that are like inside of the plant, so we've got water can enter this cell by osmosis, so it can go through the cell membrane and go into the cytoplasm of that cell, and that has to be osmosis. So water can travel through osmosis. So remember, osmosis is the movement of water from a high water potential to a low water potential across a semi-permeable membrane. However, water can also diffuse. So if you think about this, so if you boil a kettle and the steam comes out of the top, that's water vapor. And if that moves around the room, you wouldn't say that water's doing osmosis, going around the room. And the reason why it's not doing osmosis is because it's not going over a partially permeable membrane. Therefore, water must also be able to move from just diffusion, so going from where there's lots of it, a high concentration of it, to where there's not much of it, a low concentration. And what can happen is the water can also, so instead of going into these cells on the outside of the plant, water can also diffuse through them gaps in the cell wall, and then when it's next to one of these internal cells, it can go into them cells through osmosis. So water can also diffuse, and we kind of call these, these are called the apoplast pathway and the symplast pathway. You do not need to know this for GCSE, but it's for the students that are going to then go on to do A-level biology. This came directly down from A-level. So the green stuff here, you don't have to use this word apoplast, but what we do need to remember is that water can move through the kind of cell wall bits, and that's all you need to say. So water can diffuse through the cell walls, and then when it gets to where a cell hasn't got as much water, it can then move through osmosis across the semi-permeable cell membrane. Water can also just enter the first cell through osmosis, and then it can move through the kind of the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm of the different root cells is joined in these little tubes. So if it's moving through it can move through the cytoplasm, or it can move through the cell walls without actually going into the cell. But eventually it does need to go through cells, because there's a little, I don't know if you've noticed here, but there's a kind of a dotted area around here, and that shows that basically it has to get past the membrane there to then go up the xylem. Right, so that's how water moves into roots and eventually into the xylem. as I said, there's another lesson on how it moves through the xylem, so we're not going to worry too much about that now. But it then goes into the leaves, where it can either just diffuse out, it can diffuse out of the stomata, or what can happen is it can react with carbon dioxide and become glucose and oxygen in photosynthesis. Right, the last thing we're going to think about this lesson is how do plants get mineral ions from the soil. One of the most important ones is nitrates. So how do plants get them into their cells? Right, do we think just normal soil's got more nitrates in, or more minerals in, or plants? Well, plants have got tons of minerals in. That's why we eat plants, why plants are good for you. They've got tons of minerals in. So is there a higher concentration in the soil or in the plant? Well, there's a high concentration in the plant and a low concentration in the soil. So are these things going to diffuse in? No, they can't, because diffusion is high to low. It needs to go with the concentration gradient. So the only way that the plant cells can get these in is through active transport, and that is why the cells need tons of mitochondria, so they've got enough energy to do active transport, and they're grabbing these mineral ions from the soil, and then these would just diffuse through the plant till it gets into the xylem. They dissolve in the water that's being passed up the xylem, so the mineral ions make their way up the plant to the leaves, and the glucose that's made in photosynthesis and the minerals that the plant get from the soil can be used to make things like fats and proteins and other things that this plant needs to grow. Right, so that is the end of this video. I need you now to have a look at the worksheets that I've got C on. There's 3 in your booklet. You know the answers are on OneDrive, so what you should do is try the questions first of all. No, do not get the mark schemes out, just try the questions, see if you understand it. The more questions you try, the more chance of answering a similar question to one that's going to be on the end of topic test, more chance of a one that could come up in your exam. So try as many questions as you can. Second thing you're going to do is you're going to mark your own test. You're going to be really careful in seeing how many marks will be awarded. And the last thing you need to do is you need to get in touch with me about things that you don't understand. So I don't want anyone just sending us all the work you've done. Like, I haven't got time to mark 3 worksheets from 18 students. That's not really a good use of my time. You can mark your own. What I need to do, and I should be then just getting emails like, sir, I don't understand this question. So be very specific, and I can be more specific in my help, and I'll maybe record videos on specific questions that you've got and show you how to approach specific questions. Right, best of luck. Get in touch on Teams is the best way. I hope everyone's staying safe, and make sure text each other and make sure everyone is doing the work, because I'm going to know about it when you get back, right? Good luck.